Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the causal inference. Can you find causality from the real data? I was asked this question when I prepared a PhD program in Zurich ETH in 2023. And they wanted to say it's not possible for bioinformatics data, so they justified the development of the experimental technique to reveal the causal information. But I want to say you can find the causal information, partially at least, and I will walk you through how I reached that conclusion. And also, I already reviewed the paper about the permutation-based causal structure learning with unknown intervention targets, which is submitted in 2019 as a preprint in arXiv, which is written by the MIT professor Caroline Uller. And this paper discusses some concepts of restructure, Markov equivalence class, or conditional dependence, and so on. And we could find 6 strong assumptions which are not biologically feasible, so that we cannot that easily use this principle for causal inference stuff. So, I will also mention how we alleviate that strong assumptions for real application as well. Then why causality is important? Why knowledge or explainability matter? There are 2 different reasons. The first one is, even if there are a lot of strong prediction models, mostly the labels surrounding us are too sparse for them, which means very few specific cases are available for prediction models, but the other most cases are not aligned with the prediction models. For example, human language, human intuition, or weather forecasting, some real world communication between people. Those cases are actually everyday situation, but the prediction models are struggling with nowadays. So interestingly, Google Research has made a lot of models, but only few of them, including AlphaFold, AlphaGenome, AlphaEvolve, are available. Most of them are not that useful at this moment. And the second reason is even prediction models can fall into local optima or real hacking. This diagram illustrates on the real hacking situation. We want the model to reach the globally optimal path starting from the node 1 to node 100. And here, as you can see, there is very high reward of 100. But the actual working dynamics of the model is actually the repetition from the node 1 to node 2 and vice versa. In such a case, by repeating this repetition 100 times, then we can reach also 100 reward, which are not what we want, isn't it? So the knowledge matters, ground truth matters for troubleshooting. So these 2 are how I define the necessity of causal inference or knowledge or explainability. Is causal inference fake? I heard of this statement from one friend of mine, and I want to say under practical constraints, a certain causal structure is revealed. Let's look at a toy problem from now on. I met this problem in 2015, and I made this video 2 years ago.
Hello, welcome to Jeongbin study room. I've got a math problem today. Among the 6 balls of the same size and shape, 3 are heavy, and the other 3 are light. The weight of the 3 heavy balls is the same, and the weight of the 3 light balls is the same. Using the 2-arm scale 3 times, you need to distinguish between heavy and light balls. How should we solve this problem? This problem can be solved by applying game theory. Game theory is the study of mathematical models that describe strategic interactions between players, also referred to as actors. It is a theory related to interdependent decision-making. I've tried applying 2 different game theories to this problem. First is the simultaneous game theory. Simultaneous game theory refers to selecting strategies or actions simultaneously without knowledge of the actions chosen by other players. Next is sequential game theory, which is used to analyze games where players sequentially choose their actions and share information. When comparing the weight of 6 balls using a 2-arm scale, only the valid method of comparing 3 balls against 3 balls, 2 balls against 2 balls, and 1 ball against 1 ball. In other words, the number of possible outcomes in each of the 3 opportunities can only be determined using the 3 methods I just mentioned. When applying simultaneous game theory, the 3 opportunities are divided among 3 players, and each player verifies the possibilities. The answer is then obtained by finding the intersection of these 3 results. I tried applying this strategy to the problem using coding, but there was no answer. What was the reason? After much thought, I could find the reason. It was because of the asymmetry of information and the need for a sequential strategy to solve this problem. In the process of distinguishing between heavy and light.
Okay, so according to this video, we can say the sequentiality of information flow, which means sequential game theory existence, is necessarily implied by practical constraint. Here, the practical constraint corresponds to 3 times the weighing. Let's call this problem as 3, 3, 3. And in such a case, the minimum number weighing for adaptive case is 3, and the minimum number of weighing for non-adaptive case is 4. So under constraint of 3, then we can, if the players identify the way of separating the heavy balls and light balls, in such a case, maybe we can necessarily imply the existence of the adaptive strategy. So I asked this question to ChatGPT Pro to generalize to other cases. For example, in the 4-4 case, then the minimum number for adaptive is 4, and the minimum number for non-adaptive case is 5. Under constraint 4, then maybe you can say, oh, you, the players, use the adaptive strategy to identify heavy balls against light balls, isn't it? You can say that. But I also found very interesting case. In the 5-5 case, then the minimum number for adaptive case is equal to the minimum number for non-adaptive case. Then maybe under constraint number of weighing for 6, then maybe you cannot say which strategy the players have used. So the identifiability is somewhat establishes for some cases while others are not. And also I asked this question to higher number of n, but in such a case, the ChatGPT Pro could not identify the non-adaptive cases, the minimum numbers. So actually these knowledge actually are not reachable at this moment, even if the current level of AI is very powerful. Maybe in the future we can reach out this number, but at this moment we cannot reach out of it. And in 222 case, the adaptive number, the minimum number for adaptive case is 5, and the minimum number for non-adaptive case is 7. So under constraint 5 and 6, then maybe you can say, oh, the players have used the adaptive strategy to identify heavy balls against light balls. So let's look at the general n-to-n case, Let's suppose that n is sufficiently high, then maybe the m factorial can be approximated as follows by using Stalling formula. Please note that identifying, the number of cases for heavy balls around 2n balls is actually 2n choose 2n pick n, isn't it? And then its weighing can result in 3 different cases. Left is heavier, both sides are equal in weight, or right is heavier. In such a case, each decision tree can separate the given situation into 3 in every step. So in adaptive strategy, actually adaptive strategy is very similar to decision tree situation. And then maybe you can say the minimum number for adaptive strategy is actually log 3 of 2n pick n. And actually, this is the minimum number as I mentioned, and the possible number of, and actually, when you compare this number with the closest integer number, then there we can find some slackness. In such a case, in the number theory sense, we can also estimate the minimum number for non-adaptive cases. So this is an example. So the slackness higher, then maybe you can say, oh, the non-adaptive case can also reach out to adaptive cases regarding the minimum number of weighings. But if it is too stricter, then maybe we cannot say a non-adaptive case is reaching or close to adaptive case. So there can be some boundary to differentiate, for the equality and inequality regarding the minimum number of weighing for adaptive cases and non-adaptive cases. So by using Weyer's theorem, which means the n alpha means the irrational number, and n is actually the multiples of the irrational numbers. In such a case, the decimal numbers are located in 0 to 1. Then we can estimate, we can assume the decimal numbers are located in the uniform distribution starting from 0 to 1. And maybe that strict boundary can be somewhat related to this conclusion. So here it means the minimum, the number for adaptive case is equal to the minimum number of non-adaptive case with the probability of the 2/3, while the minimum number of adaptive case is less than the minimum number of non-adaptive cases with the probability of the 1/3. Please note that the minimum number for non-adaptive case is always less than or equal to the minimum number for non-adaptive case, because actually the sequential game theory is actually containing the simultaneous game theories. Suppose that in the sequential game theory setting, if the player can also ignore the previous player's information, isn't it? So actually the adaptive case should be better or equal to the non-adaptive cases. For actually, this is very strictly correct statement. And this specific conclusion is very interesting. In the probability of the 1/3, then we can say under specific constraint, then we can identify which strategy the players have used. So there is actually the identifiability is established. And in other probability about 2/3, then maybe you can say identifiability is not established. Actually, this toy problem can reveal the fundamentals of the causal inference. First, practical constraint is needed. Second, in such a case, we can also fail to identify the causal information. So I want to also explain further more about it. So what is knowledge? Knowledge is something categorical, and to do some causal inference, we need categorical labels because we are using graph, we are using some combinatorics, number theory, and so on. In such a case, exactness is established. So in mathematical sense, you can obtain the causal information, which means, oh, this is true, this is false. We can obtain that information. So exactness is needed. And to do that, categorical label is needed. So this is an example I have published in 2024 as a first author. And here, as you can see, oh, human cells are only located in the experiment sample rather than normal and control sample. So for example, no human cell is discovered in normal and control samples, isn't it? So actually the p-value is infinitely zero. I mean, which means p-value should be zero, but in the computational setting at the time, the p-value was actually 10 to the power of 300, which is a minimum digit. But I want to say, if the certain discovery is statistically significant with very low p-value, then we can say, oh, this is true for sure, to the degree of my life, So in such a case, that can become the knowledge. I think that is the fundamental of knowledge, I think. P-value matters. And graph is something mysterious. This is actually the case, the situation of the lambda theory. So suppose that 6 people are there, then we can find 3 people who knows each other, or we can find 3 other people who doesn't know each other. There are always that set of 3 people there, always. So actually the graph is something mysterious. We don't know what's going on with the graph at this moment, actually. So modern mathematicians are trying to look into graph more and more, but I think the discovery from that stuff is not that successful because it's really mysterious at this moment. Actually, the Caroline Ruler, the author I mentioned earlier, and has a thesis paper titled Geometry of Maximum Likelihood Estimation in Gaussian Graphical Models. Here, the paper discusses about the graph theory, group theory, algebraic geometry, and maximum likelihood estimation. But my gut feeling is Caroline is trying to find some eureka moments or serendipity by using graph theory, which is actually very hard. I mean, I believe there are several very surprising knowledge there, surprising theorem there, but I think it takes time and also it's not generally applicable. So that is the current level of causal inference, I think. Many people believe graph and mystery about it, but I don't think it's that practical at this moment. And the second consideration is some knowledge is contextual data specific. So have you heard of the central dogma, which means RNA comes from DNA and protein comes from RNA? And that direction, the directive graph, can also be a prior to be applied for causal knowledge discovery. So that is actually Aviv Regev, the vice president of the Genentech, Aviv Regev's strategy to do some causal inference. Actually, the causal inference is very popular concept these days. So many people, the computational biologists or machine learning engineer, so many people are talking about causal inference, and actually they use their own different priors. And actually, Aviv Regev is using central dogma as a prior. So she said, "Oh, I'm using GWAS, the genome-wide association study, and some DNA stuff, SNP, single nucleotide polymorphism stuff. So that are often found in the DNA stuff. Then maybe we can say by using the central dogma, it can also be transferred to the next layer. So we can have some causal discovery. So that is the Aviv strategies. So, but I want to say there is an exception about this central dogma. This very new science paper mentioned that DNA can also be synthesized by using protein scaffold. It's not human case, it's just bacteria case, but I want to say central dogma can also be not the prior for causal discovery. So I want to say this is very case specific. We may need some data-driven labels. And so I want to say zero knowledge proof will be needed for sure, and so on. So I discussed two things. The first one is the necessity for categorical labels as knowledge, as graph theory, or number theory, combinatorics, and so on. And we also need data-driven labels for case specificity or some continuous values for loss function as well. So it seems to be paradoxical to each other at hand, but I think it's possible by using model explainability and disentanglement. Even if these are based on the continuous data, actually they can result in very discrete labels or categorical labels. So actually they can be harmonized. These two labels can be harmonized into this specific term, explainability and disentanglement. Practical constraint is needed, as I mentioned and emphasized in the earlier slides. Without practical constraint, oftentimes the given graph, the causal information graph, can be fall into diverse possible scenarios, which is called Markov equivalence class of or MEC. Here, DAC means directive acyclic graph, so which is actually oftentimes used for causal inference. But I want to say MEC, that group theoretic term, can also be applied to diverse situation for causal inference for sure. Please note that the practical constraint is not necessarily needed for causal discovery. For example, if only there is a case of A to B to C, then maybe the occurrence of the event C necessarily implies the happening of A and B without any practical constraint. But then what about P to R and Q to R? In such a case, the happening of the P doesn't have, the happening of the R doesn't have any information about the occurrence of the P. So it's very case specific, as I mentioned earlier, for the weighing case, right? So it's very complicated. So this is the current level of causal inference. Actually, this algorithm is called the Selkoman, and this is using spatial transcriptomics, but here it uses the gene-gene correlations, and it can obtain some graph in this way. But what about the constraint? What is the constraint for this matter? Actually, in the case of the gene-gene correlation, actually, they are using sparsest permutation principle, which means the sparser the graph, the more meaningful. But is it really the case for real bioinformatics case or biological system? I don't think so. So I want to say we should develop biologically feasible constraints, and I know what that constraint is. And I will walk you through, I will mention that constraint specifically in my coming papers. Thank you.